Let's go.
Let's go. Oh, no.
Do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have razor suits!
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where I don't even know what to say this week. Like, nothing is coming to me other than that we love our gay pirates.
We do love our gay pirates. Oh my God.
I am Karen Peterson, joined as always by Lauren Humphreys Brooks. Lauren, how are you?
I'm not bad. I'm a little tired, but otherwise doing just fine here.
Yeah, and
I do love my gay pirates. I do. I love my gay pirates even more than I thought I did.
Yeah, and I love them more than I did last year. And I love all the new gay pirates. Like, there's so many, and it's wonderful, and I love it. If you don't know what the heck we're talking about, you obviously haven't been listening the last couple of weeks, so welcome. We're talking about Our Flag Means Death, which is on on Max, and we love it. And it brings so much joy to our hearts, and yeah, we're in the middle of season 2. They released 3 episodes the first week and 2 episodes this week, and we're just loving every minute of it.
Unhinged lesbians are just like, as soon as they showed up, I was like, oh my God.
I didn't necessarily think the show was missing anything until they appeared. And then I was like, oh, this is what the show was missing.
The unhinged, longtime married lesbians. like
how can you hate that? It's wonderful.
to just, get drunk and high and just throw a major monkey wrench into everything.
They are so unhinged in the best ways.
I'm sorry. I love that one of the most kind of romantic and like sweet moments between Ed and Steed is just interrupted with the lesbians laughing their asses off. It's just like, oh my God, it's so earnest.
Oh, if you don't watch Our Flag Means Death, you really should, because it's the show that never fails to just bring so much joy.
It's so true.
And I was just looking at the list that you sent of all of Ed's crimes.
He's committed many, many great crimes, honestly. Yeah, that got released as like a behind the scenes photo, I believe, of all of the crimes he committed on his wanted poster.
It's great. Unlicensed midwifery.
I like that one, yeah.
Smart casual attire at a formal function.
I like communism, whatever that is.
Wearing a wig as a hat. Plagiarism. Cart rental under a fraudulent name. Cart rental. Genocide, probably. Not the genocide is funny. It's the probably that's funny. Yes, please air further grievances below. Yeah, that's great. I love it. So, all right. Well, this week we are not going to spend the whole time talking about Our Flag Means Death, although honestly we could. But no, we thought it'd be fun to talk about urban horror and urban legends. And so we have a couple of movies that we're gonna use to just dive into this topic. So, but what is urban horror, Lauren?
What is urban horror, Karen? Well, I think that so often we associate horror with very isolated areas, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you get when you get a lot of the rural horror, so like the haunted house, the the killer in the woods kind of thing. And I think that urban horror seems to particularly increase in like the 70s and 80s in film, where it becomes more citified, right? It's like the dangers that exist within a big city, but also just the inherent isolation, that combination of being in a major city but also being alone in a major city. And all it's interesting that all of the not all but several of the films that we're talking about deal with urban legends, so those kind of oral traditions that have become popularized, that really just like modern folklore basically, and that's mentioned a number of times in both Candyman and in urban legend. But like a lot of horror, urban horror tends to be about the return of the repressed, although it tends to focus more on things like race and poverty and kind of the disaffection of youth. I think it's interesting that the first two films, The Lost Boys and Candyman, The Lost Boys is 87, I think, and Candyman is 92. So they're fairly close, 5 years difference, right? And they're set in very different areas of the country, but they're all kind of focused on these communities that have been ignored or that are feared at some level by the wider population, that kind of white flight from the cities, and moving towards suburbia. And it's like, well, what are you running from? Well, you're running from vampires and like murderous ghosts and things like that. So I think urban horror tends to really exploit those issues in interesting and less interesting ways. But at the end of the day, I think it all comes down to that question of the return of the repressed, which so much of horror is about, and those things that we don't want to look at, that we don't want to pay attention to, so poverty and race in particular.
Well, and where so much of our folk horror movies take place in rural communities, kind of like that, those have their own set of like degree of isolation, where you have an entire town that is isolated, or population of people. And sometimes you can pull that back to, an individual or very, very small group of people that is isolated. But in urban horror movies, like sometimes the fact that there's people around actually makes it more dangerous, depending on the circumstances, because not everybody's paying attention. Or if you're doing something in the middle of Halloween and everyone's dressed in a costume, how do you know which is the masked killer? Stuff like that, where the using the surroundings of having so many people around can actually heighten the danger in a very different way.
Well, and very often it's about outsiders coming into an urban space as well. So people who quote, don't belong there, who didn't grow up there, who are white people, who are, in the case of Lost Boys, people from Phoenix, but like someone who is an outsider entering the city, entering the urban space and being suspected. And I do think a lot of it kind of harkens to that kind of that pair, particularly of the white person, right? Of like, and I think that this is particularly highlighted in a really interesting way in Candyman, where you've got people entering these spaces where they are very much like, they very much stand out, right? It's just like, you're not supposed to be here kind of space. And both being protected by the privilege of whiteness, or by the privilege of the way that they dress or things like that, but also being endangered by it, and the development of that kind of tension. And that's before you even get to like the supernatural elements of something like Candyman or something like The Lost Boys. You're still talking about people who are like, you are an outsider, you're coming in from somewhere else, you're not supposed to be here, and you're in danger because of it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about The Lost Boys, which, as you mentioned, is from 1987. It was directed by Joel Schumacher. And this cast is it's just crazy. So you've got Jason Patric and Corey Haim, who play brothers. Diane Wiest is their mom. Bernard Hughes is their grandpa. And then you've got folks from the totally completely fictional town of Santa Carla that does not exist at all, and there's definitely not a Santa Clara nearby. Anyway, so some of the townsfolk are played by Kiefer Sutherland, Jamie Gertz, Billy Wirth, Alex Winter, and then you've got the Frog brothers, Edgar and Alan Frog, played by Jameson Newlander and Corey Feldman. And this is the first official film of the Coreys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman, which was a very big thing in the late 80s, early 90s. So you've got this mom who is recently divorced brings her two sons with her from Phoenix to back to the town where she grew up, where her dad lives, and they're staying with him. And very quickly they start to meet the locals, and shit gets crazy because it turns out that there's a vampire problem in Santa Carla. I love this movie. I've seen it a million times. It's just one that I don't know why. I even now, after seeing it so many times, I can't pinpoint exactly what it is, if it's any one thing that I just really love about this movie. There's so many just fun and funny moments. And also 80s Kiefer Sutherland is just freaking hot. And it's a lot of pretty people. I don't buy for a second that Jason Patrick is about to enter his senior year of high school, more like senior year of his second college degree, but we don't care about that. It's fine.
It's so true. Like watching that, I was just like, why did he have to come with his mom and his brother? Like, he's got to be at least in college, you know?
Yeah, no, he's supposed to be playing high school, like soon to be a high school senior. And it's funny because he was only like 21 when this movie came out.
He just looks like an adult. Like,
yeah.
That's the thing. He just has, he seems older. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also a difference between 21 and 17, like pretty substantial. Definitely. So people do age a bunch in that couple of years, but yeah. So, and they never specifically say that he's in high school, but there's comments like, oh, like, well, she's still having a lot of control over what he does. And she makes comments about like, things are going to change when school starts, mister, and stuff like that. So you're supposed to believe that he's probably finishing up high school. But anyway, what are your thoughts about The Lost Boys?
I have very mixed feelings about The Lost Boys because I'm not in love with it, but it's also really influential, and it's very different. Like there were a number of these kind of more, I guess, urbanized vampire movies. So you've got this movie, you've got Vampire in Brooklyn, you've got which I believe we talked about when we talked about Wes Craven.
We did, yeah.
You have Innocent Blood, which is a John Landis film that I think takes place in either New York or Chicago. I can't remember. I think Chicago.
Fright Night, which is in the suburbs.
Yeah, Fright Night, Kiss of the Vampire, with Nick Cage. So you've got there seems to be this belief that like vampires really fit into urban areas. And I kind of get that because the aesthetics of it are very sort of punkish, heavy metalish, biker gangish. You kind of question like what do these people like to do, you know? But it's very much that kind of heightened aesthetic of the disaffected urban youth, the gang member, et cetera, and it's you overlay that with, oh, they're actually all vampires. I was very entertained by Variety's quote that was on the Wikipedia page for this film. If I can find it again. Let's see, just a second. Okay, so yeah, Variety panned the film, and they said, quote, a horrifically dreadful vampire teensploitation entry that daringly advances the theory that all those missing children pictured on garbage bags and milk cartons are actually the victims of blood-sucking bikers. It's that sort of, like, I don't 100% agree with it because I do think it's a really fun film in a lot of ways. But it is that. It's just like, well, actually, you know, missing children and gang violence and everything. It's not. It's vampire gangs, you know, it's rival biker vampire gangs, like all of this shit. And it does sort of, you know, express, I think, some of that terror of the urban space of like the kids who are just, you know, hurting people for fun, who are just doing fun things. And at the same time, it's such a dorky film in so many ways that it's hard to really, I don't know whether it would have played differently in the 80s, but it's hard to really sum it up much like, oh yeah, this is terrifying. Because these guys like have the most crazy mullets. And they very much play like kids who think they look like bikers or something. I don't know. There's just this element to it of like cosplay almost, where you're just like, oh, I'm tough. Just like, sure you are, kid. Yeah, all right, you're really fucking tough.
Yeah, there's definitely that play acting, like we're playing at being tough and edgy.
Mhm.
And one of the things though that I think that work really well for this setting is the fact that this is a beach town. It's very much a touristy area. They arrive in the summer, so there's a lot of nightlife, and that is like such a perfect place for vampires to thrive, especially these particular vampires who really are a gang of teenagers who knows how long they've been teenagers, but like it's just kind of this perfect setting where nobody really looks twice at them or expects like why aren't you home, you're out
Yeah.
past curfew or anything, because it's just not how. First of all, it was the 80s and there was no such thing, but also it's just it's just this particular area. There's an amusement park, there's a boardwalk, there's all these things that just make this a bustling nightlife, which is a perfect setting for a vampire story.
Yeah, and I think that that's generally why, that's a good point. I think that's generally why a lot of there's so many urban vampire movies where and you've got pretty much clean pickings, and it is sort of that element of like the danger of the city where you can vanish and no one notices.
Right.
No one remarks on it, and particularly in like the 1980s and the 1990s, where cities were viewed as being these very dangerous spaces. So like these kids disappearing in the film, they like make a point of showing all the missing posters, the kids on milk cartons kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of all of these kids, but there's definitely this implication that no one really cares, that like no one's really paying attention to the fact that, hey, a lot of kids vanish in this town. That's weird.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that it's just kind of one of those things that just is accepted, which by the time you get to the end of the movie and Grandpa says what he says about it, it's like, oh, okay, so yeah, this is something that people just accept as a reality in this town. There are people who know about it, and they just, what are they gonna do? There's sort of this weird apparent acceptance of the reality of what's happening underneath. I don't know. I just find that really funny.
The reality of the vampires. Well, I like the kind of gang initiation that Jason Patric goes through in this film, because he's like told to do things. They're just like, why are you doing this? Yeah. Like, is it just because you've got this like cute girl? Like, that's the only reason. And these guys are just like, hey, drink this random bottle of wine that's totally not blood. Like, do this, do that. It's just like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, he's a very Michael. He's a very weak character. Like, not
he is, yeah.
Like actually the character himself is a very weak person, because he gets dragged along to this place he doesn't want to go, but he just kind of, so much of what Michael does throughout this movie is just like listening to and doing whatever anybody else tells him to do. He doesn't really have much of a mind of his own, even to the point where he does stuff that his little brother tells him to do. Like, he just is not he's not a strong personality at all, which is,
it's the dangers of peer pressure right here. That's what this film is about.
Exactly. Yeah. And how this is why you need to have a backbone, kids, so you can stand up and not eat the worm spaghetti.
Just say no. But I mean, I'm laughing at it, but I think that there is that element to it of like, oh, you should just say no, because this is what happens to kids who just like go along with the group. Yep. And you're being turned into vampires.
Exactly. Like, anybody could be one. But honestly, I think that is part of it too with this movie, is like, this did come at a time where it was like, warning kids about the dangers of being on drugs and stuff. And it's like, this in a way, in in The Lost Boys, vampirism is kind of the substitute for like drug addiction, because he goes down that same path. It's like, it starts off as something kind of harmless, and then all of a sudden he can't just get himself out of the situation. He needs help.
Yeah, you get into it because Pretty Girl was there, and she hangs out with these guys, and you want to be cool like that.
Exactly. You don't want them to think you're a loser.
Yeah, it does have definite elements of drug addiction or of kind of like an after school special, but with vampires instead of drugs. Uh, but I think that's interesting again that vampirism, particularly at this era of filmmaking, is very often represented that way as like drug addiction, alcoholism. There are parallels in a film that's a little bit later, Bram Stoker's Dracula, to like the AIDS crisis. Like there's this whole thing about disease, but it's almost like a chosen disease, right?
Yeah.
It, you know, the need for blood, the desire for blood is like something that you have to kind of participate in, right? And then it captures you and it destroys you from the inside out. And that's very much where a lot of these films kind of view vampirism. So you know, it's not a one-to-one analogy all the time, but definitely like in something like this, it definitely plays that way. And then you've got the little brother who's just like, what's happening to you? I don't understand what's happening to my brother. He used to be so cool.
We're from Phoenix. We're awesome people. Yeah. One of the things too, though, and I guess this probably speaks a little bit again to Michael's character, is in a lot of movies about vampires, you get that like seduction. You understand how they get drawn into this world. Even if you're like, yeah, that's stupid, turn away, you get it. With Michael, though, in The Lost Boys, nothing about, other than Jamie Gertz being really pretty, nothing about what they do is appealing. They're rude. They mock him from the very moment they first meet him. Like they mess with his mind when they're offering him food. Like they're just horrible to him. And it's like, other than the fact that she's cute, really nothing about this seems fun. Why are you here?
Well, yeah, in some ways the film like works against itself because, and again, some of this might be about distance from the time period now, is because it all seems so dorky. Like it really does seem like these guys are not particularly cool. They just like think they're cool.
Yeah.
You know, they're nothing, like you say, nothing that they do is particularly attractive, right? It's not like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to be like them? It's like, no, not really. And I think at that level, it does sort of parallel that kind of after school special vibe, where there's always this like effort to show the drug addicts or, you know, the pushers or whoever, who's like, you know, pressuring you into doing something. They're usually represented as being so nasty that you're just like, well, I wouldn't agree to go with that guy regardless. Like he's not cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So it like and I think that that's where some of the campiness then begins to come in, because a lot of it is just, it's sort of like, this is just sort of dorky. Like this is like someone who read Interview with the Vampire and was like, let's make it into an after school special.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And that's where I say, like, I can't pinpoint a specific reason why I just delight in this movie so much, other than that it is really fun, but it is incredibly dorky. I completely agree with you. And there's even just random stuff like how Michael, when he starts to realize that he's turning into a vampire, thanks to his brother pointing it out, because he can't even figure that out on his own. And he goes to the like vampire lair and he's yelling at Star and he's just like, what's happening to me? And then she's like, I tried to stop this for you. Okay, let's have sex. And it's just like, what? Like they just, and it's like, I'm not saying like, oh, they shouldn't have the sex scene in this movie. I'm not saying that. It's just like so random. It's just a lot of that where it's like, I feel like there's some connective scenes missing in multiple places in this movie where it's like, you're missing a transition here.
Well, it's like the Frog Brothers, right?
Yeah.
And at one point when they've like broken into the vampire lair, and one of the things with killing vampires, as we all know, is that they have to sleep during the day. So you just got to find their lair and you got to kill them when they're asleep.
Yeah.
And they have this whole dialogue about how they don't know who the head vampire is, which they don't. But it's like, but the guy who's like the literal leader of the gang, that is quite obviously the literal leader of the gang, Kiefer Sutherland, shouldn't you kill him first? Because he's the leader of the gang. So even if he's not like the head vampire, he's still definitely the most dangerous one of all of them. And they're just like, oh no, we'll kill the little guy, the one who poses very little threat first. And it's just like, you know who the leader, gang leader is. You know, it's because it's obvious to
Exactly.
anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Poor Marco.
Yeah. Poor little Alex Winter.
Mhm.
So cute.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the Frog Brothers and Sam. Actually, I don't even know what to say about them. They're so funny. They're kind of the ones that introduce us to this film's mythology surrounding vampires, and most of it is stuff that's like, all the normal things that we've heard. Oh, they don't like garlic, and yeah, like all the normal vampire rules. But and they also kind of give us a hint that this has been going on for a long time too, because they've obviously spent a lot of time paying attention to this. I think it's funny how, because they're these like middle school, early high school age kids, they're like 13, 14, 15 years old. And so they're the ones that just think they have everything all figured out, and they're like, we're going to solve this problem. This actually is such an 80s thing of like not consulting with adults, just taking it upon themselves to do it. And yeah, I don't know. Frog Brothers, they're funny.
I think with this one is that, again, it's that dweebishness. And then like everybody's a dweeb. You've got like these 14-year-old kids or whatever, and I mean, I laughed at the Sam's whole thing about just like, well, I'm from Phoenix, and it's like, oh, I'm so impressed.
People from Phoenix expect you to be impressed.
That was something of which I was not aware. I did not know that Phoenix was an impressive city to anyone, or meant to be. But it's just that kind of thing where it's just like, okay, so you're all a bunch of dorks. Like, like, no, if you're the only hope for Santa Carla, then yeah, it's understandable why there are so many vampires everywhere.
Oh, it's so true. Well, and then they think that they figured out, okay, that it's Max is the head vampire, and they're determined to prove that it's him. And I love how there's like one important detail that they completely miss, which is the fact that Max has been invited into the home, which renders all of his powers, all of their powers against him, totally useless. Like, well, I just love that.
That's a vampire. That seems to be an invention of this particular film. I'd never heard that. You have to invite vampires in, right? That's part of the story. You have to like you have to tell them to come in. That's used in a lot of vampire stories. But the idea that like, oh, it renders all of like anything they can use against him moot, like that's a new one to me.
Yeah, especially because they also then violate their own rule a little bit later when Kiefer and his friends show up, and they're able to like kill them with holy water and everything. Like they're able to defeat them in the house. But that's okay. It was a fun little twist, because then you think like, oh, it's obviously not Max, but it totally is Max. So I don't know. Overall, what do you think of The Lost Boys in regards to urban vampire movies?
Well, I like I say, I do think that it kind of expresses that social anxiety, that cultural anxiety that was going particularly in the 80s and 90s, and that whole concept of the, like you say, the drug pushers, the disaffected youths who just don't have any place, basically, right? And they don't have any adult supervision. They don't like have any, they're kind of unmoored and everything, and so their only response to it is to become violent, is to do all that. It's very much in keeping with a lot of films from the 1980s that don't have anything to do with vampires, but creating that sort of dangerous space within the urban area and ascribing it to something that is supernatural, versus it just being the reality of the way the society has developed and the way the society has failed kids, etc.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun.
It is also a lot of fun.
And I love me the sexy saxophone man.
Again, with the dweebishness of this movie.
I think it was around 2017. I think it was either for the 30th anniversary of the movie, or it was when Joel Schumacher died, and it was like memories of Joel Schumacher. One of those two big things. I think it was Variety ran a story. Someone tracked down the sexy saxophone man and interviewed him and just kind of caught up on where he is in life now and stuff. And I think it's so funny how this random greased up dude who's in like 30 seconds of this movie is one of the most memorable parts of it.
Well, I think he was like a backer for Tina Turner for a while as well.
Yeah.
So he was like a known,
like he's not a random
kind of
person.
known.
It's just like a random moment, like a random.
It's very weird.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's that to go back to my dweebishness point. It's that kind of like, this is so cool, man. It's like, no, it's not. It isn't cool. This is not cool. Like, what I'm watching here is not cool. It's dorky.
Yep, but that's part of why it's so much fun.
Exactly.
By the way, random fun fact, Thomas Newman did the music for this, and I just think that's hilarious. Thomas Newman, who is still not, he's one of the most nominated, not winning Academy Award winner or Academy Award nominees. So I just had to mention that.
Cool.
So let's talk about Candyman from 1992. We did talk about the sequel a couple years ago, Nia DaCosta's Candyman, which was so great, and I still love it. And I just watched it again the other day, and it's so good. But yeah, let's talk about the original film, which was based on a novel by Clive Barker, right? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, The Forbidden.
Yes. And but Candyman stars Virginia Madsen, Xander Berkeley, and of course Tony Todd, and was directed by Bernard Rose, written and directed by Bernard Rose. Anyway, this movie came out in 92, and this very much is a film that is about urban legends. It specifically focuses on one, but this is a movie just about urban legends too, because Virginia Madsen plays a grad student who is studying urban legends and writing her dissertation, and decides to write her dissertation specifically on the Candyman. So, where should we start with this one? This one has been talked about so much, you know. But I think that, so, you know, the Lost Boys is very much about disaffection and you know, like, as you pointed out, drug addiction, things like that. Candyman is I mean, you can't, it's inextricable from race, basically. And it's interesting because I believe that the original Barker story it's set in Liverpool, and it's more about class than it is about race necessarily. But in this particular film, it gets like the entire story gets moved to Chicago, and particularly the Cabrini Green projects, and this whole concept of this white grad student entering, you know, talking about an outsider entering spaces where they do not belong. This is very much like, leaving aside the supernatural, like, and her friend, played by Cassie Lemons, warns her numerous times. They're just like, we should not do this. This is a bad idea, right? We do not. And she's, so her friend who's Black warns her about this, and they still enter. They kind of go into this space in order to research Candyman and the concept behind Candyman, etc. And it's their entrance into this space, and particularly Helen's entrance into the space, that results in all of the murder and mayhem and violence that happens. Because as Candyman tells her, what is it? He talks about his congregation. His congregation no longer believes. Right.
Because she has entered the space and essentially explained him as something like, this isn't real. This is actually, you know, this is just poverty. This is just gang violence and things like that. And he's saying, like, it's a lot more than that. And now he targets her because of what she has done to his sacred space at a certain level.
Yeah. One of his quotes is, "I am the writing on the wall, the whisper in the," and I cannot say it the way Tony Todd does. "I'm the writing on the wall, the whisper in the classroom. Without these things, I am nothing. So now I must shed innocent blood. Come with me."
When Tony Todd says those things, just like, okay.
Yeah. Like, yes, okay, I will come with you. Yeah. Well, and then he goes on too, and he says things like, "The pain is exquisite, and there's nothing to fear," and it's
well,
he's such a captivating presence.
Even just when he first meets her, like when you get the first scene with the two of them together in the parking garage, and he says, "Be my victim," and it's just like, all right, okay, sure,
yes, I will.
Sure.
Sure,
sounds good. But it is
asked.
that, like, and Clive Barker, that's what Clive Barker does essentially. It's that relationship between horror and eroticism, and violence and eroticism, and the, like, the pain is exquisite kind of thing, that it's about suffering, but it's also about sexuality at the same time, and it's that kind of tension that exists between it. But yeah, I think that it definitely has to be noted, the fact that she does bring it on herself. She says his name in the mirror multiple times. Candyman really is one of those figures that you have to invite him in, like the vampires. You have to say, "Hey, come on and victimize me," basically. And she does.
Yeah. Well, and part of what gives him his power is the fact that when people do that, they're taunting in a way. Like they're willing to say his name into the mirror because they don't, like, just because they're curious what will happen, but they don't necessarily really believe that he will show up. And it's in that gray space between belief and unbelief that he's able to thrive, and that's what gives him power to come in and victimize people. And it's sort of this taunting, and it's like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna show you. And yeah, I've never, even saying Candyman out loud once, not looking into a mirror, always just makes me a little bit nervous. I've never attempted fate this way ever.
Well,
have you?
I mean, no, I've never done that, and I've never done the Bloody Mary thing either, which is very much what this is in reference to, right? You're looking in the mirror and you say the name 3 times, right? But yeah, I agree with you. It is that taunting, and it is that element of belief. You don't believe that the Bloody Mary or Candyman or whoever is going to show up and kill you, but also, I'm not going to do it, right? I'm not going to look in the mirror and say that name 5 times or say that name 3 times or whatever, because what if? And it is that what if question.
Right.
And essentially what she does is she does it, right? She essentially says, "I don't believe." And she brings that disbelief into his space. Furthermore, when she goes to Cabrini Green, and when she essentially is like, and she catches the guy who is supposedly like posing as Candyman, right?
Right.
And so it's like, oh, that's all that this is. And the little boy, what's his name? Marcus, I think his name is. Says like, you shouldn't have done this. This was a bad idea, etc. And she's just like, no, it's just poverty. It's just gang violence. That's what it is. And it's that lack of belief that essentially makes her and everybody that surrounds her into a target, because she's disrespected him, essentially.
Right.
She said, "I don't believe in you." And he says, "Well, I'm going to make you believe in me."
Yeah. So I have some questions about the ending of this film. I don't know if we want to jump there now. We kind of do need to, like, I don't want to spend too much time on any one particular thing, but so at the very end, so she ends up meeting this mom who has a young baby, who that baby grows up and is the hero of the protagonist of the Nia DaCosta film. But anyway, this baby gets kidnapped and or disappears, and we end up by the end, Helen has figured out where he's at, is able to save him. It comes at great cost to her because she ends up dying. And then she kind of becomes sort of this urban legend herself and is able to kill from beyond the grave. But at the very, very end, in this sort of lair that has all this like graffiti art and stuff on the walls, and this giant like image of Candyman, we also see like at the end this image of her has appeared there, and he also makes comments about it was always you, Helen. And I've heard a couple of different interpretations of that ending, and I'm just curious what you think, because I've heard someone say like, oh, she just reminds it, because we get the backstory of what happened to Daniel Robitaille, who became the Candyman. And so I've heard, some people just think that she reminds him of this white woman that he had fallen in love with, who just ended up murdered because of, or that she is supposedly the reincarnation of that woman whose name was also Helen.
I think that the implication, I think, of the film is closer to the reincarnation aspect. Although I would say it's not so much reincarnation, but a sort of spiritual relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And that part of so the backstory of Robitaille is that he's this great artist who has a relationship with his master's daughter, right? And is and she becomes pregnant. And so part of what Candyman is pursuing throughout the entire film is this kind of spiritual reunion of her and of the baby. Right. And so it's the family in a lot of ways, the woman, but also the child who's been torn away from him. And I don't think I would have to watch the film. I watched the film again, but I would have to look at it again to see if there's ever any discussion about what actually happens to Daniel Robitaille's lover and her child. Like what actually, because they talk about what happens to him.
Yeah, they don't ever talk about her.
But not about what happens to her. And I think that some of the later Candyman films, which are much lesser films, do address that in not great ways necessarily. But so it's never really revealed like what happens to that child or that woman, right? But definitely my interpretation has always been that there's a sort of spiritual reunion that he's seeking and that he eventually achieves but she sacrifices herself not for him, but for the child. And to actually protect the child and to get the child out and to let the child survive. But she still has this union with him. She still becomes the urban legend that is connected to him and that is, kind of trapped in that space with him. And I think that to a degree, I think that the film kind of says that she wants that at some level, that there is that kind of, again, going back to the horror and eroticism kind of element, that there is like this sexual union that's going on that she desires, that it's not just about saving the baby. There's also a darkness that she is exploring and that she's indulging in and going with, but she refuses to let that happen at the expense of this innocent child.
Yeah.
So yeah, to answer the question, my interpretation is I think that there's a sort of spiritual reincarnation going on, though not necessarily like a direct, oh, this is the spirit of the past Helen in this woman's body or anything like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think if they intended it to be fully a reincarnation, there would have been some more signs. There would have been her like having memories or something that would have made that much more explicit.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about Candyman?
It's a great film. It's a scary film, but it has so many wonderful elements. And I do think that there's so much to be said about it when it comes to this issue of race and this issue of whiteness and blackness and the fact that you've got this white woman invading these spaces and acting very much as a white savior figure. Like she's not disrespectful to the extent that she's not nasty to anybody. But she is disrespectful in the sense that she does not respect the belief systems or the reality of the world that is around her, right? So she continuously, kind of says to her friend, like, oh no, we're going to do this, we're going to be safe. And it's just like, you are so fucking privileged to think that you could just walk into this space where you do not belong and just be like, oh, I'm a grad student, here's my card, right?
Yeah.
And her invasion of that space brings damage and violence on people, on the very people that she supposedly says that, she, not even that she wants to protect, but that she's studying under a microscope, right?
Mhm.
And it is very much about that violation of to a certain degree the sacred, or the violation of things that you're not supposed to violate.
Yeah. Well, and I really appreciate how, like, a lot of films that center around a white savior character, like, they're allowed to just be the white savior. And I think, like, you get some of that in this by the end, but she gets called out. It's not just acceptable. And she ultimately has to die to save the child.
Mhm.
So it's like she doesn't get a hero's story arc. And I think
Yeah.
that is, especially for the time period that this came out, and I think that's good, to their credit. I think that's really good storytelling, and really smart storytelling that in some ways is a little bit ahead of its time.
Definitely. She has to fix the damage that she has done. Because
Mhm.
most of what happens, and that's part of Candyman's point, is that the damage that was done is because of her invasion of the space. It's very
Right.
much the like, you disrespected the temple kind of thing.
Mhm.
And you bring death and destruction not just on yourself, but on a whole bunch of people that had nothing to do with it. And she
Yeah.
has to try to fix that damage, and fixing that damage includes saving the child. So it's not so much like she becomes the white savior. She's literally trying to fix the things that she fucked up.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
None of this would have happened if she hadn't invaded the space, in other words.
Literally none of it. Stay out of where you don't belong. So, there's a lot of, especially horror movies, especially slasher movies, that deal with urban legends. These get referenced a lot, like in movies like Scream, and also very much like we just talked about in Candyman. So it seems really fitting that in 1998 there would come along a slasher movie called Urban Legend. Which is a movie all about urban legends, and every murder in this movie involves some sort of urban legend. Even murder, even like non-murder scenes. There's just a lot of urban legends referenced throughout this film that make it, I can't say this is a good movie, but it's definitely an entertaining one.
It's a mean movie. When I first saw this film, I was like, this is just mean. And I kind of like that. Like, it's
Mhm.
mean in a way that, like, Scream is not a mean film, right? There's not, you're kind of waiting for the violence to happen. But this was just like, I am really enjoying watching all these people die. Like, there's something very nasty about it.
Yeah, this is like, we talked about the 80s stacked cast. This is very much a late 90s cast. You've got Jared Leto, Alicia Witt, Rebecca Gayheart, Michael Rosenbaum, Loretta Devine, Joshua Jackson, with a very cringy but still kind of funny little reference to Dawson's Creek in there. Tara Reid, and of course, Freddy Krueger himself, Robert Englund, as a professor at this university where there's, they have their own urban legend at this university of someone who died on campus, and they're taking a class about folklores and legends, and it just grows from there. And I love that this movie opens on one of the urban legends that terrifies me the most, which is the
Yeah.
stranger in the back seat. um that is one that still terrifies me to this day, because it actually it happened to a friend of mine. This girl I know. No, it actually really did. My best friend, this is when we were like freshmen in college. She was at my house and she was leaving to go home. She went out to her car, and she got in and noticed like her music had been knocked over, and she was like, "Oh, that's weird." And she kind of looks back, and there's a guy in her back seat. And she jumped out of the car and came
Oh my
screaming back
God.
to my house, and we called the police, and they did not find the guy. Yeah, and I that was
Oh my
many years
God.
ago, and I'm still terrified to this day. So this is like, that opening is like, It freaks me out still.
I mean, that's the thing with a lot of urban legends. There's very often some degree of truth to them, right? That, and I think it's pointed out actually in the class that they're taking, that it's not so much that these just are made up stories, but it's like they're stories that may have actually, something similar may have happened to someone. It's never this precise story, right? But it's something like that, you know. And that's where the urban legends kind of gain their power, because a lot of them are just plausible enough that you're like, yeah, that could happen. Yeah. That could definitely happen. And there's always like, oh, this happened, you know, to my friend's brother, or, oh yeah, this happened to my second cousin, or things like that, where there's always that one story that you know is actually true.
Yeah. Or that happened at this house across town in the city I grew up in, or whatever. Yeah. So there's always some connection. Like I remember hearing the story of like the roommate that gets murdered in college. Like I heard that from my cousin, who told the story like it had happened at her school. So I thought this happened at my cousin's school, and like that it was completely real. No, it didn't. It wasn't. but yeah, these legends kind of take on a life of their own just because of how they get told, the way they get passed down. And they're generally being passed down to very susceptible kids who want to believe in this stuff, or not necessarily want to, but who very willingly do believe in this stuff because the world is a scary place. So yeah, so these urban legends kind of grow. So let's talk about urban legend. The tagline on this movie is, "What you don't believe can kill you."
Well, you know, again, to go back to what, you know, so Candyman, the story of Candyman is very much the urban legend. And of course, the one that, you know, we grew up with is the Bloody Mary story. But it's a very similar thing where it's like that space between belief and disbelief. You don't believe the story, but you always check your back seat.
Right.
You know, you never say Bloody Mary in the mirror 3 times. So there is a kernel of belief underlying all of it. You don't, and it's represented in this film about the Pop Rocks and Coke thing. Right. So we're gonna, well, no, of course I don't believe that, but will you do it? Right. Will you drink the pop? Yes, I am not. No, I don't think I will. Like, and that's the thing. There's that little element of belief, and that's what the in this particular case, that's what the killer exploits. Is, you know, the element, that space between belief and disbelief.
Yeah, it also just makes reality out of so many like urban legends that you hear about, like the headlight thing. Don't flash your high beams because that's going to be a sign and they'll come after you, but also don't not flash your high beams because maybe that's why they'll come after you. Or the guy with the hook outside of the car, and then the fingernails on the roof, and the guy hiding under the car ready to slash your Achilles tendon. You know, like all these things that we've heard so many cautionary stories about, or horror stories about, and get used throughout this movie as like ways for the killer to exact some revenge, because the killer in this case has a very specific, this is another revenge story. We see this in a lot of these type of slasher movies, and it takes a while before we understand exactly what the killer is after and why, but this is like using all of these ideas, these scary stories, to enact a very specific agenda.
Well, yeah, and also to so part of the killer's motivation is a result of an urban legend coming true, as it were, being treated as truth, right, and being exploited, and it killing someone that they cared about. And because of that, it like then spirals into this like, well, we're going to bring truth to all of the urban legends, basically. And of course, in all of the urban legends, no one ever escapes. Right. Like no one survives the urban legend. And that's very important as well. And so she exploits that belief and lack of belief, but the fact that at least one person knows that there is some truth to one of the legends.
Yeah. It's also a good way to discredit this person that's being built up to be the final girl, which is Alicia Witt playing Natalie. Where this is all, at some point we finally realize this is all centered around her, and this is something to do with when she was in high school. But because, when she's out with um Joshua Jackson's character, and like she sees him die, like he is dead. But because of the way that it happens, when she's trying to tell everyone later, they're just like, that's not real. And also, wasn't he going away this weekend? Like, he's just gone. He was messing with you.
Yeah.
And so it's like she kind of ends up letting them gaslight her a little bit while she's gaslighting herself. But also, that is like, because it's using these urban legends, that is a way for the killer to make her look ridiculous to anybody who is willing to listen, because obviously that didn't really happen.
Yeah, exactly. The story, oh no, because I've heard that story before.
Mhm.
Yeah. Just like, oh, you're not telling it right.
Yeah.
That's the other element that keeps on coming up. Yeah, it's actually it's a lesser film in a lot of ways, very much in kind of the generation of those 90s slashers, of like meta slashers, right? So I know what you did last summer, which is also an urban legend. And stuff like, and then Scream, obviously. But at the same time, it does do some very clever things. And does do some very clever things with, again, exploiting also the audience's knowledge of those things, because we've all heard those stories. Right? We all know a lot of the stories that they talk about. Like, yeah, I've heard that story before. Like, it's one of those things that has been passed around. And well, here's a version of it.
Yeah. Well, here's actually a list of some of the urban legends that are either overtly acted out in the movie or at least referenced. So the murderer in the back seat. Let's see. Coverage of Michelle, the first girl that gets murdered. Coverage of Michelle's murder in the university newspaper is covered up by the dean, referencing the university cover-up of a campus murder. And let's see. Brenda and Natalie attempt to invoke Bloody Mary. Professor Wexler, the pop rocks and drinking soda, and the whole death of little Mikey from the Life cereal commercials. That was also an urban legend. As far as I know, he's still alive and well today. And then let's see, the hanging from a tree above the car, the gang initiation with the headlights off, the roommate strangled in bed with the "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the light?" The ankle slasher under the car. Let's see, a guest at the fraternity party claims that the song "Love Roller Coaster" contains a real murder scream. Yeah, I forgot about that. The dog in the microwave, the kidney heist, and so those are all actually in the movie, and then a few that are referenced. Replacing a roommate's birth control pills with baby aspirin. Let's see. Caller asking if she has to have her stomach pumped after performing oral sex and ingesting semen. And then the babysitter and the man upstairs legend, and spider eggs in bubble yum. So yeah, those are some of the various urban legends in the movie Urban Legend.
Well, and it's interesting because around about the time that when we decided to do this, and I'd watched Urban Legend, I also then watched When a Stranger Calls.
Yeah.
So the 1979, which is a very odd film in a lot of ways, but is very much that the call is coming from inside the house story, right? And it's the babysitter and the man upstairs. And so watch it, but again, I think horror films are very good at doing that, good at like taking those stories that a lot of us have heard in one way or another and being like, well, here's the real story, here's what really happened, kind of thing.
Which is what we end with in this movie, because the killer gets killed, but then suddenly shows up at another college and says, no, and you guys are telling it wrong.
They never find the body. That's the thing. Just like, oh, right. But they killed them, but they never could find the body because the current was so fast. It's just like, well, are they still out there, kind of thing.
Exactly. Anything else you wanted to mention as far as Urban Legend goes?
It's not a great film, but it is a fun film.
It's entertaining. It's another one of
It
those.
is.
If you haven't seen it, or even if you haven't, it's been a while. Like it's entertaining enough. Don't expect this to be on the same level as like Scream or some of those other mid to late 90s rebirth of the genre, but it's still worth watching.
Definitely, yeah, and I do think in terms of the what we were talking about when it comes to urban horror, right? Now this takes place on a college campus primarily, but it's very much using all of those urban and suburban stories that are like kind of a part of the American folklore. And a lot of it, it's funny, we were talking about the witch and witchcraft stories and things like that. So much of it comes down to similar concepts and similar ideas that just get repeated and transmogrified into their particular setting and to address the particular kind of repression or fears, right? Cultural fears that are underlying whatever place they're taking place in. So, the college campus, the city, the vampire biker gang, the killer, even with something like Candyman, where the story that most of us have heard is Bloody Mary, but it's like, oh no, it's actually the story about this slave who was murdered and who is like haunting Cabrini Green.
Yeah. Urban legends are fun, and urban legends make great horror movies because they really do capitalize on the things that we're already afraid of.
Yes, you said that very well and succinctly. For all of it, it's just like it's this thing. It's like, yes, it's all the things we're afraid of. Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. I think this has been another really fun conversation. We hope you've been enjoying our spooky movie month. So the next couple weeks, we're gonna do some more spooky movies. So we'll be letting you know what to watch out for. And but we do appreciate all of you for listening. We especially want to thank our patrons who help keep the show going. They are Ali, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Heather, James, Judy, Karen, Carriata, Lauren, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, and Tao. If you would like to join Patreon and become a subscriber and supporter of the show yourself, you can go to patreon.com/citizendame. There's also other ways you can support us. We do have our Ko-Fi account, which is ko-fi.com/citizendame. And we have stuff in our store, zazzle.com/citizendamepod. But if you are good on stuff and just want to read more of our works and our thoughts, you can go to our website, citizendamepod.com. We've got some reviews there, some more stuff coming up in the next few weeks. You can reach out to us. You can email citizendamepod@gmail.com, or you can find us on the social medias. We're still technically on Twitter until it's done and gone. But we're on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky @CitizenDamePod. And then we are also a Letterboxd HQ @CitizenDame. And you can keep track of all the movies that we've been talking about on our spooky movie season. Every month we have a new list for all the movies that we've talked about that month. We also have all kinds of other lists. So if you're looking for movies to watch or want to see links to some other things, just check us out on Letterboxd and give us a follow there. You can also find us individually. Lauren, where are you?
I am on all the various socials at LH Business.
And I am at Karen M. Peterson. So that's going to wrap things up for this week. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.
Bye.
Helen.
Yes?
Helen.
Who is that? Who is that?
Helen, I came for you.
Do I know you?
No. but you doubted me.
I'm sorry, I have to go.
No need to leave yet.
But I'm late.
You are not content with the stories, so I was obliged to come. Be my victim. Be my victim.